What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? Welcome to episode 14 of the Be Great podcast. This one's going to be a little rough for a couple reasons. So, a lot happened on Saturday. I keep saying that every Tuesday episode. I keep saying that a lot happened. And I think maybe it's just kind of a given that something big is going to happen every single Saturday. Firstly, we had what was quite possibly one of the best football games of all time in Tuscaloosa. And it involved my team, the Georgia Bulldogs, and we're going to just go ahead and start with that because there's no better way to start than with that game. I expected that no matter what, if Georgia lost, I was going to be pissed off and upset. And yet I find myself shocked that Georgia managed to find the one way to lose that really I'm upset because we lost. At the end of the day, that is truly what matters. But I can't be too upset with what I saw. I can be upset with the first half performance. I can be upset with 4 turnovers. I can be upset with the third game this season out of 4 where we've come out in the first half looking confused, bored, not prepared, and lazy, right? But then the second half happened and we look like a completely different team. The second half happened and we look like the best team in the country. And I come out of this, you're down 37 at half. And it looks like an utter nightmare for Georgia and every Georgia fan. And then the unthinkable happens. You come back and somehow take the lead. Now, obviously, you end up losing the game. And that play to Ryan Williams, defensively, you just can't let that happen. That's an embarrassment. But the fact that this team didn't quit, didn't fold, came out after halftime and decided to play ball and decided that they were not going to go out like that. That they showed resiliency. Like they showed they actually had heart. It looked like a football team that grew up during a game. It looked like a football team that figured out who its leaders were. And I loved that aspect. How many teams do you see go down big and they just give up? Florida State, prime example. Florida State has done it ever since the bowl game against Georgia, except against Cal. Every other game they have given up once they have been down. Ohio State, notorious for it. Ohio State is notorious for if they're getting pounded, they fold. Look at the Michigan games. They have folded and they have looked soft and they have given up. Look at them against Georgia. Georgia started to actually give Ohio State some pushback in the playoff game a couple years ago. Georgia actually started to come back on them and pound them, and they folded. They allowed Georgia to come back, and then their kicker had one of the most famous folds you've ever seen. Crumbled under the pressure. Teams do this. And I'm not worried about Georgia. I'll tell you what would make me worried about Georgia. If Georgia comes out against Auburn this Saturday and it is the same garbage where we're slow in the first half, We can't get things going until the second half, and then we end up winning by 3 touchdowns by the end. That will worry me. Because, yeah, sure, you won by 3 touchdowns. But why is it this team cannot come out the gate ready and prepared to play football? Why? Why? Because that's a problem. That's a problem. Because the reality is, if you play the entire game against Alabama like you played in the second half, you win. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. But you didn't. And that's a huge problem. But I'll be interested to see how they come out against Auburn this week. I need to see a pissed off football team for the rest of the season. I have to see it. I need to see them come out and beat the crap out of Auburn, beat the crap out of Mississippi State, and they need to go into Austin, Texas and make a statement. Remind people who this team is, because people have clearly forgotten. I'm frustrated, obviously, that Georgia lost. I'm frustrated that Kirby seems to just have this kryptonite. He goes up against those jerseys and just can't get it done. He's done it one time, and it's starting to more and more look like a one-off, a fluke. Now, there's a good chance that Georgia and Alabama will have a rematch at some point down the line. So we'll see. See, what will really hurt is if Georgia loses to Alabama again this season. That would be very painful and hard to swallow as a Georgia fan. But I sit here right now, ironically, very proud of this team for the way that they came back and refused to give up, refused to fold, and the pride that they showed in that second half. And obviously, Alabama looked good, which is kind of to be expected, but we'll see how it goes from here for both teams. Georgia needs to come out pissed off against Auburn, plain and simple. They need to destroy them. Another game I want to talk about, the second game I really, really want to talk about, is a game that happened in Oxford, Mississippi between Ole Miss and Kentucky. I'll say this. Other than losing to Alabama, it was a great day for Georgia. Kentucky beating Ole Miss was fantastic for Georgia. I mean, the amount of people that were clowning Georgia for only beating Kentucky by 1 point, and then for Kentucky to go out and beat Ole Miss at Ole Miss. At least the Georgia game, it was in Kentucky. And oh man, I want to know, where are all the people who were yelling up and down that Jackson Dart is going to win the Heisman? Where's all the people who are screaming up and down about how this is the best? Ole Miss might be one of the best teams in the SEC. Where are all those people who, after Ole Miss's toughest opponent before the Kentucky game was what? Wake Forest, Furman? And people were giving them so much credit for garbage, for facing a bunch of nobodies. And this is how this is how you separate the great teams from the elite teams. This is how you separate it. When great teams have an off day, they lose and they can't overcome. When elite teams have an off day, they find ways to win no matter what. And you might say, well, Georgia, does that mean Georgia's not an elite team? They lost to Alabama. Well, that's kind of a different case scenario since they're both elite. One has to lose. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. But the moment Ole Miss faced any type of adversity, When they faced Kentucky, what happened? They folded under the pressure and they crumbled. Crumbled. And if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm sick to my stomach. And I'm telling you now, I, I don't I don't see a way that Lane Kiffin is Ole Miss's head coach next year. Not because I think Ole Miss is going to fire him. Obviously, they're not going to. This is the most relevant Ole Miss has been since Hugh Freeze. But I can wonder, sit here and wonder. I mean, if Lane Kiffin gets offered that Florida job, there's no way he's staying at Ole Miss. Florida is a way better job. There's no way he's staying at Ole Miss if he gets offered that Florida job. It's not going to happen. But I just think a lot of people owe Georgia an apology for what they said about them after the Kentucky game. That's all I'm going to say about it. That's all I'm going to say. I did want to talk about a story that came out. It was actually came out last week before um, the episode that I uploaded on Wednesday, or was it right after? Doesn't matter. It came out last week. I forgot to talk about it on Wednesday last week. So I decided I was going to talk about it today. So there was a story going on at UNLV of a quarterback, Sluka was his last name. Basically, it was all very interesting. There was multiple stories out. Sluka's people were saying that he was promised a certain amount of money, NIL money, to come and play and transfer to UNLV. He didn't get that money, so he's sitting out the rest of the year and he's gonna transfer. But then UNLV said, "Hey, we promised Sluka a certain amount of money, and we gave him that money. But then because they were 3-0, Sluka came to UNLV and said, "Hey, now I want more because we're 3-0." UNLV said no, and so now he's throwing a hissy fit. I tend to lean, and it seems like most people are leaning on UNLV here. Look, I'm all about players getting their money and getting paid using their name, image, and likeness. I have no sympathy for a player who agreed to come to a university for a certain amount of money. And all of a sudden, because you're playing better than expected, you now want to change and make it more. And when you don't get your way, you whine like a little baby and now want to leave. I have no sympathy for you. And isn't it hilarious that this happens? And the backup quarterback has to start for UNLV, and UNLV absolutely destroyed Fresno State this weekend. Destroyed them. How hilarious is that? And this is going to start a trend. I mean, you've already seen it. Bear Alexander at USC going to sit out the rest of the season and transfer. What a joy this is going to be. Can't wait. And I'll tell you what needs to happen. These little NIL contracts need to be made public. They need to be made public. Because you have NFL players who sign these contracts to go to teams. That's all public. We're told how much money they're getting over how many years. The same needs to happen here because this is ridiculous. I'm all about you getting your money through NIL, but what I'm not here for is this nonsense of, oh, I'm going to pay you this amount just to come play for us. But then the kid is playing better than we thought, so now he wants more money. Oh, he doesn't get it because we're UNLV, we're not Georgia, and so now I'm going to sit out. I don't like it. I don't. I think it's pathetic. And I think it's going to start a very bad trend for college football. Let's get to my picks from this past week. I did fine. I did all right. 6-4. We'll go over them one by one. So I picked Miami to beat Virginia Tech. and that pick should be wrong because Virginia Tech deserved to win that game. They should have won that game. Um, I think what happened on the Hail Mary at the end of the game is very interesting. That's all I'll say about it. I'm not I'm not going to get into further detail about what I mean by that. I just thought it was very interesting. Washington versus Rutgers. I picked Rutgers. They ended up winning. I typically haven't done well with these Thursday, Friday night games, but I did good this past week. Washington's just not very good. Rutgers seems to be on the up and up, and it's just another good win for Rutgers. This might have been the easiest game for me to pick. Well, actually, Ohio State, Michigan State was the easiest one to pick. I told you how that was going to go. But this one was the second easiest. Kansas State versus Oklahoma State. If you saw Oklahoma State play against Utah, you would have known Kansas State was going to win this game. And I know what you're saying. Oh, but did you see Kansas State versus BYU? Oklahoma State was facing a backup quarterback for Utah, and their offense looked unbelievably putrid. And oh, shocker, they faced Kansas State, who has a solid defense, and it's once again unbelievably putrid because Oklahoma State refuses to run the football for some reason, even though they have Ollie Gordon, and they want to have Alan Bowman, who's 1 year away from being in the retirement home, throwing all these passes when he's mediocre at best. And it was just, I just saw it coming. I saw it coming. Kansas State is the type of team to rebound. Oklahoma State's not. And at what point, if you're Oklahoma State, do you start to consider firing Mike Gundy? At what point do you consider it? How much longer can you accept mediocrity? I'm just curious. How much longer can you accept just being mediocre, being flat out average, sometimes being the top of the Big 12? Most of the time you're up there, but you're like fourth or fifth. How much longer can we accept this? Texas and Oklahoma are gone. There's no more excuses as to why you're not winning this conference. And yet you lost to Utah and just got beat down by Kansas State. Like, what are we doing? And right now, as we sit, can we say Oklahoma State's better than Arizona? Can we say they're better than Colorado? Can we say they're better than UCF? Can we say they're better than BYU? They're obviously not better than Utah, obviously not better than Kansas State. Are they better than Iowa State? I mean, you really start to go down the list here and you start to really wonder how many of these teams Oklahoma State's better than. And I don't understand. I would fire Mike Gundy very soon by the end of the season, especially if this continues. Kentucky, Ole Miss, I already talked about. I picked Ole Miss. I'm very happy Kentucky won, though, and proved me wrong. Notre Dame, Louisville. I picked Notre Dame. I had a good feeling Notre Dame would win this one. Louisville is kind of overrated, in my opinion. Then again, I believe every ACC team is overrated. And if any team from another conference is facing an ACC team, there's a good chance I'm not picking the ACC team. So that one was really quite simple. The ACC is just trash. Ohio State, Michigan State, that was predictable. Michigan State doesn't have the players yet. Michigan State doesn't have the players yet to compete against an Ohio State or anybody like that. I think Ohio State, their game this week against Iowa, will be their first actual test, maybe. Although Iowa is very hit or miss, but I think it could give Ohio State some trouble. But I'll have the pick for that game on Friday. Oh boy, and then I have to get to another one that I was just so wrong, and I have to sit here and I have to be honest and I have to apologize. I went on a big old rant about how UCF was 100% beating Colorado, and Colorado's not as good as people think, and this, that, and the other. And boy, was that wrong. Now, I do think it's ridiculous that they are favored like the second, like they're like the second highest as far as favored team to win the Big 12. I think that's ridiculous. This team's not winning the Big 12. But I was very impressed with their win over UCF, and not just because they won, because this felt like the first time I had seen Colorado truly dominate a team that was competent, an actual good team in UCF, and Colorado handled them offensively and defensively for 4 quarters, handled them. And that was impressive. And we needed to see that out of this team. Now, will it continue? We'll see. Their schedule is only going to get harder. All right, you still have Utah coming up, Kansas State coming up, Oklahoma State coming up. So it's only going to get harder. And Colorado is going to have to continue this. Can they make a bowl game? Maybe. They have I predicted 4 wins this season, and they're already there. They're 4-1. So to me, it's just a matter of, do they lose out like I had predicted, or can they win 2 more? I mean, they have Cincinnati. I think at this point they're better than Cincinnati. They have Texas Tech. I'd probably say they're better than Texas Tech. So this team might go 6-6, 7-4. Or sorry, 7-5. But we'll see. But I was wrong about Colorado. I can admit that. Illinois versus Penn State. Once again, I'm always so right on Penn State. I was right again in the West Virginia game. I was right with this game. It's like I've said. This is the math, the calculation when it's James Franklin and Penn State. When they're facing a really good team like Ohio State or Michigan, they will not win because James Franklin's incapable of doing it. But when they're facing one of these games, a game that still has some hype to it, a team that doesn't have as much talent, but they're undefeated, they're on the come up, that's when Penn State wins. And they had an impressive defensive performance against Illinois and came out with the dub. Georgia, Bama, I picked Georgia. We already went over that game. Arizona, Utah, I wish I had picked Arizona because I think I even said it on Wednesday's episode last week that I had this feeling that that this was the type of game where Arizona would then beat Utah. And I should have picked it, but I didn't. I wish I had because I was thinking it the entire time. But it is what it is. I picked Utah, and I have to live with that now. Let me go through the Week 5 slate, see if there's anything else. Texas played Mississippi State, their first SEC opponent. Wasn't as dominant as I was expecting, but at the end of the day, they got the dub, and that's what matters. Mississippi State, though, they showed some heart, they showed some fight against a far superior opponent, and that's good to see if you're a Mississippi State fan, for sure. Let's see, Oregon beat UCLA, handled them. Oh, Michigan, Minnesota. Michigan is so trash. I mean, Michigan is such an embarrassment. It's actually insane. I'm just curious because I actually enjoy my life, and so I didn't watch Michigan, Minnesota because that just does not sound appetizing. I'm just curious to know. So Alex Orji threw the ball 18 times. That's more than I thought he would. 10 completions for 86 yards. Okay. Khalil Mullins, once again, I will just ask, why is Donovan Edwards on the cover of College Football 25? He's not even the best running back on his team. But I digress. Daniel Jackson had a phenomenal catch in the end zone for Minnesota. I did see that going all over social media. And Michigan was very close to letting Minnesota come back and win this game. By the way, Army and Navy are both 4-0. Shout out the armed forces. Let me just say that. Because Army absolutely destroyed Temple. Then again, Temple's trash. Anywho, LSU handled South Alabama as they should. USC Wisconsin was interesting for a while. Wisconsin was winning that game for a while. I was very shocked because I just don't think Wisconsin's good. but USC ended up pulling away in the end. Clemson handled Stanford. Once again, Clemson scored 40 points. When are we just going to acknowledge that this Clemson team's actually good and that was a good win by Georgia? When can we just acknowledge that? Iowa State handled Houston 20-0. I think Iowa State might be the best team in the Big 12 as of right now. They're undefeated. Are they the only undefeated team in the Big 12? They might be, unless I'm forgetting. Oh, no, BYU. BYU is also undefeated in the Big 12. They beat Baylor 34-28. That was a game where I was actually kind of tempted to make it a part of the pick'ems, and I was actually kind of tempted to pick Baylor because that would have been such typical BYU. Win a massive game, beat down at home against Kansas State, and then lose to Baylor. That would have been so typical, but it's whatever. Yeah, Kansas State destroyed Oklahoma. Oh, this game. Oklahoma-Auburn. What an absolute garbage. What garbage was that? First of all, if you're Auburn, how do you lose? How do you lose that game? And if you're Oklahoma, you should be thanking your lucky stars you got out of there alive. And also if you're Oklahoma, I mean, you got to be worried about how you're gonna fare in the SEC long term when this is a very bad Auburn team and you are barely beating them. And you probably shouldn't have beat them if we're being honest. But that's neither here nor there. At the end of the day, you won. Indiana continues their reign of terror, destroying Maryland. I wish, because Indiana was the second team that I was thinking of making my surprising team in the Big Ten. I went with Michigan State. And I still like the Michigan State pick, don't get me wrong, but I really wish I'd picked Indiana. Indiana is just they're destroying teams. Destroying them. And I knew Signetti was going to be a great hire. Texas A&M, Arkansas played a football game. Whoop-de-doo. It was a 21-17 slugfest. That's what it was. And I think the Missouri at Texas A&M this week is going to be very interesting. It's going to tell us a lot about Missouri, I think. And I've flip-flopped so many times as far as who I'm picking for that game. Boise State destroys Washington State. You know, I've heard Jalen Milroe for Heisman. I've sat here and I've heard Travis Hunter for Heisman. I think if Ashton Jeanty is not your Heisman, I don't think you're a serious person. I'm just going to be honest. This guy's insane. This guy is absolutely insane. He's so insane that I wouldn't mind spending a first-round draft pick on him. And I hate spending first-round draft picks on running backs. As a Steelers fan who drafted Najee Harris in the first round, guy's an absolute bum. I don't like spending first-round draft picks on running backs. I would do it for Ashton Jeanty. He's the only one I would do it for in this upcoming class. But I would do it. 100%. He's a stud. He deserves to be in New York. He deserves to win the Heisman as of right now. Not Cam Ward. Cam Ward was mediocre at best against Virginia Tech. Not Jalen Milroe. And who else? Not Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter would be second for me, to be fair. He'd be second. Nebraska beats Purdue. I feel like Nebraska has scored 28 points in most of their games this season. Am I tripping? Maybe I'm tripping. Boston College squeaks one out against Western Kentucky. NC State squeaks one out with a struggle win against Northern Illinois. If you're USF, you talked all that trash to Alabama fans. You talked all that trash to Miami fans, and you played good in both those games, but still ended up losing by a lot. And then you show up and get just a bomb dropped on you by Tulane. That's kind of embarrassing. Just going to put that out there. Just to hammer home the point of why No one should have been hyped on Ole Miss. Their best win, which was Wake Forest lost to the Raging Cajuns in Louisiana this past weekend. Just so we're clear. Kansas loses again. I mean, talk about a disappointment. Kansas has been such a disappointment. Losing to TCU 38-27. I mean, they can't buy a win right now. Like I said, UNLV destroyed Fresno State. Duke with another win. Duke is still undefeated, beating North Carolina 21-20. Duke is looking like a really solid football team. Really solid football team. And I think their game coming up at Georgia Tech is interesting. I think I am definitely I'm kind of leaning towards that might end up being an upset. Just putting that out there. Just putting it out there. Let's see. Anything else that was interesting? Texas Tech and Cincinnati played no defense. What's new? Liberty App State got canceled, unfortunately. Oh, yes. How could we forget? How could we forget that Florida State got annihilated by SMU? The Methodists, the Ponies, absolutely destroyed Florida State. Is Florida State going to win 2 games this year? Or maybe they'll just win 1. Maybe it's just the Cal game. Because after this, they might just be defeated. I mean, they were already defeated. They might quit. Although I feel like they already quit. But I thought the Cal game might have given them a little momentum, a little bit of life. No, that didn't happen. They just went to SMU and tried to play football. They failed at playing football, but they tried, I think. And I will say it again. I understand that they went undefeated in the regular season last year and won the ACC. If this team wins 1 or 2 games, I'm firing Mike Norvell. I don't care. You're Florida State. Under no circumstance should you ever win 1 or 2 games, or even 3. It's unacceptable. Unacceptable. I think that will be all that I'm going to talk about. I saw the new AP poll. Georgia fell to 5, which is about what I expected. Again, Georgia still has their full season ahead of them. It's like what I said on Wednesday last week. It's more about, I said that Alabama fans and Georgia fans, whoever loses needs to remember you're not out of anything. Like, yeah, it sucks to lose. It always sucks to lose, but you still have the whole season ahead of you. If you're Georgia, go out, destroy Auburn, go out, destroy Mississippi State, go to Austin, Texas, and make a statement and beat Texas. And then you're being talked, and that's what matters. I think Kirby wants his team to be in the spot that they are now. Not necessarily losing. He never, I'm sure, wants his team to lose, but where his team's being doubted, where his team is, ranked 5th in the nation. I think that's a spot that Kirby likes to be in. And I think Georgia, if Georgia loses to Texas and Austin, I would probably start to think, okay, this team's probably not winning the national championship. Even though once you get into the playoff, past the first round, everything's neutral site, but still. And like I said, I will start to be very worried about this Georgia team if they come out slow against Auburn and Mississippi State. I will be very worried about this team. But that is all for episode 14 of the Be Great podcast. Next episode will be Friday, will be my pick'ems. And if any news comes out about anything before then, I will also talk about that. Thank you very much for listening. Have a great day.